Good evening. The dramatic music warranted tonight. Welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A huge day. The day, frankly, we've been waiting roughly 2 years for. Mueller report finally been released. It is redacted, but there are still tons of significant details about Russian interference in the election, as well as the president's attempts to obstruct the investigation. I want to go live now up to Capitol Hill with Marcy Gonzalez. She joins us with more. Marcy?
And the report is nearly 450 pages long. The redacted copy released today is not surprisingly getting two very different reactions from Republicans and Democrats. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report finally released today, detailing the results of a wide-ranging 22-month-long investigation and finding no evidence of a criminal conspiracy between President Trump or members of his campaign and Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election.
As he said from the beginning, there was, in fact, no collusion.
The issue of obstruction of justice, though, is a bit more complicated. The report highlighting 11 instances of potential obstruction, finding that the investigation was allowed to run its course despite President Trump's repeated efforts to interfere, listing multiple instances in which he directed White House counsel Don McGahn to fire the special counsel. The report finding the president's efforts were mostly unsuccessful, but that is largely because the persons who surround the president declined to carry out his orders. Mueller ultimately reaching no conclusion on obstruction of justice, noting if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state.
The special counsel made clear that he did not exonerate the president, and the responsibility now falls to Congress to hold the president accountable for his actions.
The report shows upon initially learning of the special counsel investigation, the president stated, "This is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm expletive." Today, though, a much different tone. The president maintaining his claims of vindication.
I'm having a good day, too. It was called no collusion, no obstruction.
But Democrats say this is far from case closed. They're now calling on Mueller to testify here on Capitol Hill within the next month. Live on Capitol Hill, Marcy Gonzalez, ABC News. Now back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Marcy. Now we're going to spend the balance of this show talking about the Mueller report. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, he'll weigh in a little bit later. We'll also hear from former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. He, one of our go-to guys for legal analysis for over 2 years now. And tomorrow we will hear from you. We will open up our phone lines. But first, let's bring in Harry Litman. He joins us, a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General appointed by President Clinton and also a former federal prosecutor in his own right. And Harry, I want to start off with that quote that, we have to be careful saying on TV. When hearing that Mueller was going to be appointed, the president said reportedly, "Oh my God, this is terrible. It's the end of my presidency. I'm effed." With what we saw in the report today, do you believe his fears are warranted, or did he dodge a bullet?
Well, maybe it hit him in the midsection, but not to the heart. But obviously, he thought that it meant the doom to his presidency. That's not the statement, is it, of a kind of innocent man, and nor is it in accord with the way at least the Attorney General portrayed him today, having not guilty intent, but just feeling as if enemies were after him. Obviously, he believed that there was enough to do a mortal blow. Of course, it brings up also the adage, if you shoot for the king, you've got to kill him. And it may be that Mueller felt that, there was just the crowning blow just wasn't in reach, and therefore he had to stay his hand. It does seem as if things could have turned out even worse for Trump than they did. It's no complimentary report, to say the least, but it does look as if the things he most feared when he heard about it did not come to pass.
And we're going to talk later on tonight about those additional investigations, as many as 14 referrals to other district courts, also Congress's role. But let's stay on Mueller for a second, because there seem to have been, and you've forgotten more about this than I know, but Mueller could have gone different places than he went. He could have pursued certain interviews, including issuing subpoenas for the president. He could have made more declarative statements. He could have chosen not to punt to others. What surprised you, not just with what Mueller uncovered, but also what he chose not to pursue?
Two things surprised me. First, I really expected that the equipoise that the Attorney General had described would have been an opinion by Mueller to serve this up to Congress. Whereas, in fact, Mueller really did something really anomalous for a prosecutor, especially for him, especially in this kind of case. He actually reached a point of saying, I just can't say, and threw up his hands. I did not expect that. It doesn't seem very much in character, and it did open the door for Bill Barr to say, look, it's a binary process, yay or nay. You don't get to yay, then it has to be a nay. So that sort of surprised me. On the decision not to subpoena, the report itself left me a little confused. Mueller says, first it seems he didn't think about it till late in the probe and he was worried about time, but then he said we didn't do it because we felt we understood the conduct adequately. That certainly seems to be saying that based on circumstantial evidence, we understood that Trump had guilty intent. That's what normally happens in an obstruction case. But then when it gets to the actual finish line, he says, we're not sure. Those two statements seem at odds with each other, and they're only the most important juncture in the whole report. So that also surprised me or left me somewhat puzzled.
You know, Harry, my reading of it, and tell me if you have a different one, is in the most bizarre reading of this that I can, the president seemed on multiple occasions to be saved by his own incompetence. On the conspiracy front, there certainly seemed to be both a willingness and an interest to work with the Russians who, in damning detail here, obviously impacted our elections, hacked, and certainly the president wasn't running away, nor was his associates, from what they found. But they couldn't get their act together to pull off a conspiracy. And secondarily, on the obstruction side, apparently on multiple occasions, 10 of which that are outlined here, there was an intent to obstruct, but people weren't listening or paying attention to the president. Don McCann refused to fire Mueller. He described even later on here that he was going to resign and walk out because of doing crazy stuff that the president kept asking him to do. It seemed that no one was listening to the directives of the president, and the president and his friends couldn't get their act together. Not exactly, or I think the best way to say is damning praise. What was your take?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with you, and it's not much of an exoneration, is it? On the so-called, on the conspiracy side, which is what we should call it, you know, what do you expect upright people to do? Report things to the FBI. Instead, we had a series of things we already knew where the campaign was excited and happy to get these efforts from a foreign power. Mueller says at the end of the day, not that they, basically he sees guilty intent, but an absence of knowledge that they were actual Russian officials, which is quite a technicality. The notion is we didn't know they didn't know for certain they were card-carrying members. That's first. And on obstruction, yes. These 10 things, some of which were new. For example, his telling McGahn to fire Mueller again and then pushing McGahn to lie. I don't think people were, it was the gang who couldn't shoot straight. In a couple instances like McGahn, he knew better than to listen to Trump. So on both those counts, you could say there's a sort of moral guilt. There are, it wasn't for lack of trying that both crimes weren't completed. But again, you see Mueller being extremely cautious and maybe indulging this principle that, and the overall setting here, unless I have one clean through the head shot, I just can't bring the charges, which implicitly means he was putting extra weight on the fact of the presidency, that it wouldn't be the case with any other Joe of a defendant.
You worked for the Justice Department, and I'm curious, if you work there now, Harry, what I heard from the Attorney General, who seemed to confuse himself this morning that he was a personal attorney for the president instead of the top law enforcement official, and the repeated attempts over 2 years to marginalize the Justice Department at every turn, how would you feel right now? To me, I think it's an entire agency under assault from the executive branch. Do you disagree?
Not at all. I would feel really deeply disappointed. If nothing else, when Barr arrives, you think it's the cavalry ready to stick up for the really unfairly, outrageously demeaned FBI and DOJ leadership and Mueller himself over the last couple years. You had to imagine, yay, here comes Bill Barr, he won't put up with that. And instead, he really seemed to give a little bit more of it. At the press conference, he seemed to go so out of his way to echo Trump's very talking points. And of course, you have the terrible, I would say, blunder, but maybe just ill-advised statement about spying last week. I know for a fact that rank and file were, happy when he arrived. I don't know how they feel now, because he does not seem to have counteracted what, by any account, is an unprecedented and vicious series of, and meritless series of assaults on the probity of the institution of the Department of Justice. Maybe he'll have occasion soon to do so, but so far he has not pushed back, and I personally, as you say, given my view of the department, feel disappointed about it.
Finally, and I know this is a political question in its essence, Harry, but in terms of the standard that was intended for a high crime and a misdemeanor, and the expectation we have of an occupant of the Oval Office, do you believe what we learned today? Forget about even the intent of what the president has done on both of the claims that Mueller examined. Do you believe it reaches the threshold? Do you need to learn more, whether it be Mueller under testimony or additional hearings? Or have you heard enough to say there's not enough there, or that there is?
Yeah, boy, that's a real tough one, because it is ultimately that political judgment, and it seems as if now there'll be no appetite for the Republicans in the Senate and House to go forward, and it would need to be bipartisan. But look, there's a lot of learning from the founders that the kind of conduct we've seen here, especially the abusive and dishonest conduct to achieve office in the first place, is the stuff of impeachable offenses. And the Mueller report really seems to rest on legal technicalities. I'm a prosecutor. Technicalities are a fair reason to not be charged criminally, but really almost a happenstance. And as a matter of basic equity and moral conduct, I think the president rightfully stands accused of some very abuse of office, hair-raising, I would say. So, I, if I were a congressman, would give it a hard look. On the other hand, it's such a political calculus, and do they first think, and I think they might first think, it's probably not going to happen, and we don't want to go down this road as the Republicans did in '98, and we care about all the things that, other than the actual judgment, might now prevail. It's a shame. There's a real possibility that there's just never a reckoning in any institution for what's been seriously abusive conduct.
And it is stunning what we have come to almost accept as the new normal. Harry Litman, thank you as always, Harry. I appreciate the time.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we're going to obviously keep this conversation going in the Mueller report. We'll bring in our friend, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. Roland, he's been joining us since the start here. He's next with his analysis. And as we've said, the Mueller report is not the end of this by any means. Another major revelation includes cases now farmed out to other courts as well. Stay with us. We'll have more after this.